OCO, and welcome to the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown. I am Tyler Thomas, the Executive Editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, and I am joined today by Cherokee Nation Tribal Council Secretary Janice Taylor and CMB Government Relations Manager and Cherokee Nation Census Complete Count Committee Coordinator Gene Perry. In this virtual roundtable discussion, we will hear the thoughts of Councilor Taylor and Mr. Perry in respect to the importance of all Cherokees completing the U.S. Census. Secretary Taylor and Mr. Perry, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
All right. So as we navigate the greatest public health crisis in more than 100 years, the United States is also currently trying to conduct the 2020 census.
Yeah.
The most current data shows the national self-response rate for the 2020 census as 63.4% and the state of Oklahoma's as 58%. Mr. Perry, can you give me a breakdown on the current status of the 2020 census and also explain what the self-response rate numbers reflect?
Sure. So where we're at is that the census has sent out all the mail that it's been sending out, telling all the people in their households to fill it out. They've done some follow-up mailers and have now just, in fact, this week started going door to door for the people who haven't responded yet, asking them to fill out the census. And what that self-response rate is are all of the households, all of the addresses the census has that they've heard back from. So it's not going to reflect the people who end up having their information filled in by a census worker at their door, but it's everybody who went ahead and filled it out on the phone or online or in some cases by mail. You gave the statewide and the national numbers, but within Cherokee Nation, there's a lot of variation. So we have everything from in Rogers and Washington counties where 2 out of 3 households have already self-responded. And then on the other side, in places like Adair and McIntosh counties, just about 1 out of 3 households have responded. So there's still, especially in some places, a lot of work left to do.
Mr. Perry, who needs to complete the 2020 census, and when is the deadline for individuals to complete it, and how easy is it to complete it?
Sure. So the deadline is September 30th. And it needs to be completed by 1 person in each household, and whoever is completing it needs to put in the information for everybody in the household. So that's everybody in your house or in your apartment or housing unit or wherever people are living together. And that includes obviously yourself and your close family members, also extended family, any roommates or non-relatives living there, foster children, infants and young children. Unfortunately, they tend to get undercounted. Some people don't realize that they need to include all of those people. So it's important to keep that in mind.
And how about marking your Cherokee Nation citizenship or anything like that? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so the whole form takes just 10 to 15 minutes. It's pretty simple to do. And what you'll do when you fill it out is you give your name and your age and some racial and ethnicity information. And on the race and ethnicity section is where you'll put in that you're a Cherokee Nation citizen. So you mark American Indian, Alaska Native. You can mark other things too, depending on your background. But as long as one of the things that you mark is American Indian, and then underneath there, you write in Cherokee Nation as your principal tribe. And it needs to be Cherokee Nation. Cherokee by itself isn't going to work because they don't know which Cherokee tribe you might belong to. So we want to make sure you're counted for Cherokee Nation.
Of course. Secretary Taylor, you have been a participant in several conference calls and meetings with tribal officials and Census Bureau officials. What is the current sentiment on the success of the 2020 census?
Well, as Gene alluded to, the numbers are somewhat low. And the fact that the census workers are just now starting their door-to-door campaign has made it difficult. And so the Cherokee Nation and the Census Bureau are both struggling to get everything turned in on time. The deadline change has complicated things for us. We had to pivot back in the spring when coronavirus shut everything down. And so we've had to try and come up with alternate ways to get the information out that everybody needs to complete this. We're doing a mailer directly to those households that have in the counties, that have low response rates. That's going to be going out. We're also in the process of tying in our Cherokee National Holiday advertising with the census. There will be a place on there where people can mark whether they have done the census or not. Just trying to get the word out that every Cherokee needs to do it.
Okay. Mr. Perry, how has the tribe been working with the Census Bureau in 2020?
Yeah, so the Census Bureau has a big job trying to run everybody across the country in all kinds of different communities. So they rely a lot on local partners, including Cherokee Nation, to really understand how to reach the people in each community. So one of the earliest things we did was have some workforce events trying to help make sure Cherokees get hired to be census workers, both because we want to get good jobs for Cherokees and also because they're going to best know how to reach the people in the community and what to ask them and what to do to get them to fill out the census. And as we've gone on to the counting, we've communicated with the Census Bureau. They've provided information for us, what to talk about, how to share information, and try to keep them apprised. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has prevented some of the things we would have done, like having census workers at community events and things like that. So we've had to just adjust and do the best we could.
Secretary Taylor, both you and Mr. Perry have alluded to the effects of COVID-19, but can you elaborate more on how during the meetings, what your observations are on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the 2020 census process of collecting this data?
Well, we do a lot of our information getting out to Cherokees. We do at our community events, and those community events have been halted, and so we haven't been able to do that. So we have relied more on our social media presence, and now we are going to do the direct mailer. But we also, the census workers themselves, ordinarily by now would have been doing their door-to-door campaign, and just this week they have been allowed to do that. And so even that looks different. They're going to be wearing masks. They're going to be carrying sanitizer with them. They are going to be doing most of the interviews on the porch rather than going inside the census, the homes, and just trying to maintain that social distance.
The data collected by the Census Bureau is used for a variety of purposes, including the redistricting of electoral districts, allocation of federal funds to communities across the country, and the decision-making processes of companies considering opening new stores, restaurants, factories, or offices, and more. Mr. Perry, can you elaborate on how the data is used in this fashion?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the electoral districts, that's a big part of it because that's actually in the U.S. Constitution that we have to do this census so that we can make those electoral districts. And that has a big impact on how we're represented, not just as Cherokees, but as citizens of Oklahoma and the United States. So if you'll remember, in prior to 2000, Oklahoma had 6 representatives in the U.S. House. And the census showed that population in this state wasn't growing as fast as other parts of the country. So we lost one of those representatives, and that could happen again, or we could, on the other side, gain a representative if we complete the census and show that we've got the numbers to have that. And businesses also use the data a lot. So they're going to look at the numbers to show where is population growing, where is there a good population of people who could be workers at my business, or where's a good population of people who could be customers, and they're going to use that to make decisions about where they're going to open new facilities or where they're going to expand or try to market to. So from government to representation to business to federal grants is another big thing, and I know we'll talk more about that in this interview, but basically all federal money or almost all federal money depends on census data for them to decide where they're going to send it.
Okay. Mr. Perry, is it also used in the adjustment of the state office electoral districts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Census Bureau will first send the numbers they come up with to Congress and the president, and then a little bit later they're going to send it to the states. And that's what the state will use to make all its decisions about our state legislative districts, city council districts, all sorts of different representation that we have in all of our communities.
Secretary Taylor, how does the data collected by the Census Bureau directly affect the Cherokee Nation?
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that Cherokee Nation's operating budget is over $1 billion. And approximately 75% of that comes from federal programs that we administer on the local level or grants that we can apply for. Only about a quarter of that of our budget comes from money generated inside the Cherokee Nation. And so it is vitally important that we make sure every Cherokee is counted. We keep excellent records on our citizens. We know how many we have. But if our records differ from those on the federal level, we are not going to get our share of funding. One example that most people can relate to is our housing authority. Most of the things we're able to do for Cherokee citizens at the Housing Authority come out of federal funds. And so whether it's building new homes, whether it is handicap equipping homes for elders to allow them to stay in their homes longer, or providing safe sanitary housing after some type of natural disaster, most times those are federal funds. And so if we are not counting every single Cherokee out there, we're leaving some funds on the table that are going to other tribes.
Secretary, how much do you estimate that each response from a tribal citizen to the 2020 census earns the tribe in federal funding?
When we started looking at the census, we knew it was coming up. We did a poll across our government, and the numbers that we came back with was each Cherokee that responds equates to about $5,000 every year. So over the 10 years between census, that is approximately $50,000 in funding that each Cherokee brings in. And the inverse is true on that. Each Cherokee that does not report potentially costs the tribe $50,000 over that 10 years.
As we said in the beginning of the discussion, the state's response rate is trailing the national rate. However, within the Cherokee Nation's reservation and the counties vary with some lagging significantly, and some surpassing the national average. Secretary Taylor, why do you believe the response rates of Adair County at 36.3% and Delaware County at 41.4% are trailing so far behind counties like Rogers, which has a response rate of 66.7%, and Washington, which has a response rate of 65.2%, or even a smaller county like Nowata, which has a response rate of 49.3%?
Part of that is, as I alluded to earlier, Cherokees like the human connection. They like to sit with somebody to talk about things, and they do get a lot of their information from the community meetings and community events that we hold. We have not been able to have those, and so we haven't been able to sit down face to face with some of these families and tell them how important the census is. Many families haven't even been able to have their family reunions and the times that they would ordinarily get together and talk about those things. So that's one issue. Another issue is a lot of our communities are more rural than they are urban. And so the census is based on the actual household. And so materials do not go to post office boxes. They only go to an actual physical address. And so if an individual does not receive mail at home, they have not been notified. And so they potentially don't even realize that it is a census year. This year, for the first time, the census is encouraging people to fill out their information online. And a lot of our counties don't have adequate internet availability. And so that's another issue. So it's a combination of things. And we have just got to figure out how to get the word out. And I would encourage anybody to talk to their friends and their families, anybody that's in their circle, and just ask them if they filled it out and try and impress on them the importance of getting it done.
Good point. Mr. Perry, what is the tribe planning for this final stretch to help these counties like Delaware, Adair, McIntosh, Sequoia to increase their self-response rates?
Sure. So as Councilor Taylor mentioned, we've got a mailer that should be going out pretty soon to those counties, just trying to remind people, and this will come to the mail, P.O. boxes, even for people who aren't receiving their mail from the census. And we are working at the food distribution sites and the elder assistance sites that we've got, which we're making sure we have people at all of those who have information about the census and also have an iPad so we can actually help people fill out the census right there, make it easy for you. And then we've got more social media videos coming out. We've got one from Deputy Chief that should be coming out next week, working on one with the Tribal Youth Council to try to get young people to encourage the elders in their family and in their community to fill it out. And then we'll be doing a lot during National Holiday. We'll have a virtual booth, some presentations, and then with all of that, the biggest thing is still going to be, I think, all of you out there. I imagine the people who are watching this video are really interested in this, and I'm sure you've filled out the census already for yourself. But I bet that you know somebody in your community or even in your family who may not have. And so I just hope all Cherokees out there will spread that word and talk about how important it is and help somebody who may need assistance filling it out.
Secretary Taylor, is there anything more you would like to offer before we end our virtual roundtable?
I would just like to say that as a counselor, and this probably goes across our government, the biggest constraint we have in helping people to meet needs is a lot of times budgetary. And so this is one way that every Cherokee citizen can help to plump up that budget, is to turn that in, get it counted, and that will help us to receive more funds to better serve our citizens.
Good point. Mr. Perry?
Yeah, so if anybody out there has other questions about the census or ideas about how we can do more to increase our count, I'd encourage you to contact me. You can email censusinfo@cherokee.org or call 918-430-3488. And we've also got a website, census.cherokee.org, that's got that contact information as well as the information on how you can fill out the census and make sure you're counted as a Cherokee.
Secretary Taylor and Mr. Perry, thank you for joining me today in discussing the 2020 census and helping shed light on its importance in regards to the Cherokee Nation. I also want to thank our audience for watching this episode of the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to catch our next episode. What up?
What up?
Yep.